Good to today's webinar from the Open Group, which, as you can see, we are talking again about ArchiMate 3.0. This follow-on webinar from the one that Mark ran for us last week, where he spoke about some of the new features in ArchiMate 3, and as today you can see, he's going to be talking about some more of the practicalities. Mark is from BizDesign. I think it's fair to say Mark is an expert in ArchiMate, having been involved in the development of the standard virtually from its inception. Before I hand over to Mark, I'd just like to touch on a few housekeeping points to keep the event moving forward smoothly. Firstly, with regards to questions, if you'd like to ask Mark a question, the best way to do that is to write it into the QA text facility. Do write a question in there. I ask you to address it to all participants. That one gets to see all the questions that are being submitted. As I said, we will try and answer as many questions as we can at the end of Mark's presentation today. If you'd like to share a comment about today's event or about ArchiMate, or have a discussion with a fellow attendee, then the best way to do that is to use the text chat facility. The event is being recorded fully, so for any reason you have to leave early, or if there's any local technical difficulties, and the audio can sometimes be problematical, then everyone who's registered will get an email where they can get hold of that recording. So are you ready? Can I ask you to start your presentation?
Yes, I will. In addition to your last remark, I will also share my slides. I'll have a download link at the end of the presentation so you can get the slides themselves as well. You said my presentation last week was really walking people through the different features of ArchiMate. Today it's much more focused on practical examples, although I will start with the heart of what's new, but we'll get to that later on. An introduction about myself and about our company, BizDesign. We are, well, you could say in the business of business design. We help organizations in designing and realizing business change and enterprise architecture, and ArchiMate is an important part of that. Around on our company, we are present in about 10 different countries, lots of customers, and our ground is in from R&D Institute in the year 2000. BizDesign was founded as a spin-off from the same institute that originally developed the ArchiMate standard. Our institute at the time, I managed the ArchiMate project. Only changed to BizDesign about 3 years ago. I have a long-standing relationship with ArchiMate, with the standard, and with BizDesign itself. A few of my contact info, so if you want to read me later on, you can find the details in the slide set. I will share the link, as I said, at the end. And most important in this list of stuff that I indeed was the manager of the development of ArchiMate initially, and still was leading the core team that developed version 3, the latest version of the standard, within the Open Group, with them from different organizations. That's about the introduction of myself and where I work. Then on to the presentation that I'm going to show. First of all, provide background on ArchiMate and ArchiMate version 3, especially those of you who didn't attend the web last week. To the structure of the language and the main additions, and then I will move on to a number of practical use cases, showing you how you can use these concepts, these additions, these improvements to the language in practice. As Simon already said, at the end there's ample time for Q&A. So itself is a language. For those of you who are not familiar with it, ArchiMate is intended for enterprise architects to provide more rich specifications of architecture. And the is basically shown in the cartoon on the right. You have all kinds of nice diagrams, but if you always have to ask the architect what they actually mean, if they have no fixed meaning, then you're in trouble. Then you have to, do a lot of, say, the typical PowerPoint architecture. Doesn't really practice, and I think the cartoon is a sort of worst case scenario when it doesn't mean anything. It's just rectangles. But if you have models, you can do a lot more with them. It's not just a picture to hang on the wall. It's actually a structure that you can analyze that creates transparency and traceability across the entire enterprise, from high-level strategic goals to the implementation in systems, the project that realize these systems, to the processes, the people involved, etc. So it's really more than just pretty pictures. The alignment in your organization across these different areas. By providing these links, it becomes easier to see where's misalignment, where you should on that, where you can help the organization become more coherent. And form decision making, because you can use them in various ways to perform all kinds of calculations, cost calculations, for example. You can create, say, cost distribution models. How do the cost of your infrastructure and how are they going to be distributed to the business units making use of your systems, your portfolio management, risk assessment, all kinds of deep analyses, impact of change analysis, etc. So models are really a very powerful means for change. So what is a language? Well, it is a language with concepts to describe architectures. It's detailed design language. It's really intended for this architecture level of abstraction, so it doesn't replace languages like UML or BPMN or others that are really more detailed. It has its own framework for organizing these concepts, and I'll walk you through the changes in that over the iterations of the language. It has notation, but has a vision on how to visualize architecture for different stakeholders, and the main point that the notation itself is not completely tightly coupled to the underlying models. You could visualize models in various ways. Optional to have a standard notation to avoid the problem I mentioned before. The architects don't understand each other, but it's equally that you can visualize these models in different ways and make that stakeholder dependent. Of course, there's a way of doing that because it really depends on the kind of stakeholders you have. But the idea is that the visualization itself should be decoupled in a way from the model structure. So in a repository and visualize them in various ways. Today, of course, I will focus on ArchiMate as a standard notation as well, so you will see mostly ArchiMate pictures. But it's really important to keep in mind that, for example, when you address an audience, that the ArchiMate pictures, the graphical notation, might not be the best way to do that, but the ArchiMate models provide you with a lot of rigor and analysis power that you can use to provide decision makers with the right information. Finally, ArchiMate is an open standard maintained by the Open Group. We haven't, well, we don't have to go into this. You're attending an Open Group webinar. ArchiMate language in between strategy and design. This is what you typically ArchiMate is a modeling language, and ArchiMate model bridge this gap between high-level strategic approaches like the business model canvas or balanced scorecard or SWOT analyses or what have you. Detailed design models in languages like BPMN or UML or others. ArchiMate is less detailed, it's less formalized than the lower-level models. Concrete than higher-level strategy models that you find in the upper level. So ArchiMate bridges that gap, and it also bridges the gap between different models like BPMN and UML, because if you want your business processes and your applications and show the relationships between them, ArchiMate helps you with that, but you couldn't do that within just BPMN or just UML. You need the bridge between them to have this overview. Maybe interesting to you, I ran a poll last year on the ArchiMate LinkedIn group to see where ArchiMate typically is used, and as you can see, government and finance and information technology, those are the biggest sectors where you see usage of ArchiMate. But you see an increasing usage in, for example, manufacturing and retail and telecommunications and other areas. So enterprise architecture as a discipline, but ArchiMate as a language in particular, is increasingly used in the less traditional sectors where it grew up. It really started out in government and finance, but today it's less than half of ArchiMate users that are in these two sectors. So we do see an increased usage in other areas, and that was also one of the motivating factors behind the next version of the language. So why do we need a new version of ArchiMate? Well, of course, the discipline of enterprise architecture is evolving. It's other areas in other domains that require new concepts to relate enterprise architecture to other areas. Especially over the last years, we saw an increasing demand for relating architecture to business strategy. It's really seen as a means for implementing strategy, for making sure that the strategy can really work, and also to provide feedback to strategy to see what your strategic options are to deal with technology innovations, etc. In the physical world, ArchiMate until now didn't have any concepts for modeling physical technology. So you could, well, later on give an example of a steel factory, that's really physical. The Internet of Things and those kinds of technology innovations, we could model the Internet, but we could model with things. Now concepts to do that, I'll show examples of that as well. Like I showed you this slide, we see increased usage of ArchiMate in other domains than the traditional government and finance. So new domains require new kinds of concepts like, well, manufacturing with its physical equipment. We need to have the concepts for modeling those. And then other reasons for improving the language: increased consistency, comprehensibility, improvement, etc., and improvements with other standards. Because of the improvements, we see most of that last week, but I will show some of the areas where we have added concepts and where we have improved. So I will just walk you through some of the highlights. But first of all, the structure of ArchiMate. Its framework initially started out with these three columns of active structure, behavior, and passive structure, which is the structure of human language. All humans have subjects, verbs, and objects. Order depends on the grammar of the language, but they all have subjects, verbs, and objects. And that was the inspiration behind the structure of the ArchiMate framework initially. So in this example, we have John, who's the subject of the sentence. He is an actor in this model. He reads a book, so the process is reading, and the thing he reads is a book, a business object. This structure replicated across the layers that we have in ArchiMate, and initially those were the business application and technology layers that are very common in many architecture approaches. So that's what was the first ArchiMate language, ArchiMate version 1, is what was developed in this R&D project with the Telematica Institute I spoke about. In 2 of the language, we added 2 areas that were not yet covered. Action world. So what's the reason behind your architecture? Why do you want to have something? What are your goals, your requirements, your principles, etc.? Innovation and migration world. How do you realize the architecture in practice? What are your project programs, work packages as we call them in ArchiMate? What are the deliverables they provide? How to sequence this, etc. That is the second version 2 that came out in around 2012. Now we've added 2 new areas. We've added some concepts for modeling strategy. After that later on, things like capability, for example. And we added concepts from the physical world. So technology that's not IT, but technology in the physical realm. And as you can see from this picture, it's really linked to the technology layer that we already have. So I will show you how this works. It's really because increasingly physical technology is, of course, computerized, is driven by IT systems, and it's inseparable. And the Internet of Things is just an example of that, but nowadays it has some sort of IT inside it. So that language, this is the coverage of ArchiMate at the moment. Really into the details of ArchiMate, we no longer talk about extensions. We used to call it the motivation extension, for example, but we see this really as an integral whole set of concepts that belong together. So it's not just a core and some extensions, but we still sometimes address the original part of ArchiMate as the core of language, because that's where it all started. Of this new version of the language, before we go into more examples, we have concepts for modeling strategic issues, capability-based planning as one important way of implementing strategy. So we'll see those. This really in strategy execution. Also in line with other approaches. TOGAF, of course, is a prominent one, but also you might be familiar with the BizBoc from the Business Architecture Guild. Their capability concept, just to name one, is really closely aligned with the one in ArchiMate. Or the business innovation model, which has a concept called course of action for modeling strategies and tactics. We have that now in ArchiMate. So those were the approaches that we looked closely at. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We took concepts from existing methods, approaches, languages, and linked them to what we have in ArchiMate. From capability-based planning, forthcoming, we will provide more detail on how this works in practice. Then we have, so the technology layer was extended with elements for the physical world, things like manufacturing or logistics, but also computer-controlled machinery, the Internet of Things, etc. And provide examples of that later on as well. Then there were improvements. One that's probably quite popular with the more experienced ArchiMate modelers is that you can relate things to relationships. For example, on the left, you see that you can relate an insurance policy to a so-called flow relationship between policy creation and policy management. So you can model what is flowing there. But you can link relationships to plateaus, and we didn't. And you couldn't model that in a plateau in the development of your architecture. A relationship was added, that there was a new link between two applications. The applications is part of the plateau, but not the relationships. So now we have added that. You can do that. And now we now have actual semantics for the grouping concept. Group to be just a graphical thing. It didn't mean anything. It didn't bind the stuff inside it. It was just a graphical notation. But now you can really use it much more effectively. You can put things inside it that are really aggregated by the grouping and you draw relationships to and from the grouping. So in this case, you see that this grouping really aggregates a number of processes in an object and together realize a service. So this ability, for example, in modeling architecture building blocks. If you're a TOGAF user, you know about the prominence of ABBs and SBBs. Well, the grouping concept is really useful for modeling those. But of course, use it in various other ways as well. Highlight is that we added a specific notation that helps you identify in which layer a certain concept lives, especially in larger diagrams, larger view architecture where you combine multiple layers. Because I've kept the notation quite simple, you see that, for example, a service is denoted in the same way across the different layers. But it's have a notation makes a difference, especially if you, for example, print black and white and really want to make clear which layer you live. If you look at this here, you see the little B corner for business layer, the A for application layer, and the T for the technology layer. So one example of how to use that. Of course, example, it would be pretty clear where things are in, but this would be helpful as well. It's general notation. You're not obliged to use this, but it might help you. We have some updates to increase consistency of language, so it's more regular. We align the definitions within the language across the different layers. In the technology layer, which were called infrastructure or something. So that was quite inconsistent because the layer was called technology, so we renamed them technology something. And we also have consistency across the layers in the behavioral concepts, for example, with process interaction and event at all layers next to function that we already had. We have operation, etc. So it's a more regular language in that way. For highlights of the language, I will now move into more examples and show you how this works in practice. Well, there's capability-based planning. The source of the most requested new concept in ArchiMate. I think the last 5 years or so, capability-based planning has seen increased usage. Actually, the last 3 years, I've seen a lot of organizations drawing up capability maps and working with capabilities as a way of investments and also to buy things they lack. So that's 4 new concepts that we've added to the language that really help you address this, say, more strategic planning issue. And I'm not going to read all the definitions to you, but it's just to a flavor of what these things mean. Ability is what you can do as an organization, what you're able to do. So it's something that you may be able to do right now. It could also be something you want to be able to do in the future. And that's, of course, what you want to do with capability-based planning. Identify the capabilities that you need to develop, that you need to improve, that you want to hire. In that sense, it's also a concept that's different from a business function. We can have a long discussion on the difference between capability and function, but business functions are more close to the current organization structure, are explicitly managed by the organization and assigned to, let's say, organization units have to perform these functions. But capabilities are more future-oriented, are more aimed at what you want to be able to do and where you want to go with the organization. And KPIs are often not explicitly managed. You might have abilities as an organization that you explicitly assign responsibilities to. So it could be uncover new capabilities that you already have, but realized, and you can do new things with that. Maybe create new business out of that. So capabilities and business functions related, but are not the same. You do need business functions to realize your capabilities. Capabilities can be much broader than that. We'll see examples later on. Then we have, this is a generic concept that connects all the structure elements in ArchiMate that contribute to a capability. So it could be the people in the organization, the systems you have, the physical assets, but also the skills, etc. Those can all be seen as resources. File resources, of course. Those all help you realize these capabilities. The concept called outcome. We did have concepts for modeling goals, but didn't have concepts for modeling the results. So we now have a concept called outcome that helps you actually achieve. And finance of action, that's a new concept that I mentioned already, that was taken from the business motivation model. It's typically used to model strategies and tactics. So it's typically used to describe how you employ certain capabilities to achieve outcomes you want to have. So typically used in the form of a capability map. That's the most common way of drawing that. It's a structured overview of what the organization does or can do. And it's very useful to use capability maps because you can map all kinds of other information onto them. Say the strategic importance of certain capabilities, or the associated with them, or performance, or other KPIs. Can relate all kinds of resources to them, and of course use it for planning purposes. So the example today is from ArchiSurance, our fictitious but realistic insurance company that we have used for many years now. There's this description in the white paper available through the open group and TOGAF. This is something we're now updating to reflect the ArchiMate 3 concept. But this insurance capability map inspired the Panorama 360 reference model for insurance companies. Here you see the typical things that ArchiSurance needs to be able to do to function as an insurance company. This is their current capability map, divided in strategic, operational, and support abilities. This is what they do today. And then they of their current capabilities against efficiency. So they've created a number of metrics to see how efficient their capabilities are. Smart them against an industry average, and here you see the heat map resulting from that. And you see that some of these capabilities perform really well, the green ones, because these are above average, but some perform below average, and there's room for improvement there. Kind of heat map like this, that's something that management often uses to see where they need to invest, where do we need to improve, where do we need to put management attention, etc. So this is just such overview. Of course, there's more. It's not just a word for a capability, but there can be a quite complicated analysis behind that, and that's later on. But these maps are useful. You can use them in various different ways. You can, well, for example, plot the strategic relevance of capabilities there. One strategy here is mapped in yellow, the other in orange. So some capabilities contribute to one strategy, others contribute to another strategy. You can look at more detailed business goals. So here you see a bit more variation. And you can even plot, for example, the supporting applications on top of your capabilities. So this is, well, you get these striped pajama-like pictures. But this is really useful to show the same background, the same capability map, and map the kinds of information on top of that, because people recognize this layout, recognize the capabilities, and it's very easy to use this to depict all kinds of information. In our software business design Enterprise Studio, this is really a one-click operation. It's really very easy to map top of these capabilities. So the color views are, I really use them very extensively to show all kinds of data. Like I said, then just the overview of capabilities and the colorful pictures. Capabilities are often assessed across different dimensions. And I've taken dimensions that are quite common: the process and product dimensions, the technology supporting a capability, the information you have, and also an excellent vision on the capability. And what you see is that the currency of the capability, well, it was stated in it lacks, especially in the product dimension. So there's a lot of room for improvement there, and this would also be the way to assign to allocate investments to this capability specifically for this product dimension. It needs to improve in that dimension, so you can use analyses to allocate your investments. To model this, of course, there's more detail behind that. So what we hear is that this process dimension itself is again a more complicated metric that's built up from a number of different sub-metrics. In this case, the adaptability, the maturity, the performance, and the variance of the process. We model that using sub-metrics, and in the language, there's a so-called language customization mechanism that's described in the standard, and basically says that you can specialize existing concepts in the language and add specializations to your models. And one example of that, it's the finalization of the already existing driver concept in ArchiMate, and a driver that can be measured. So a metric is a driver where you can really put a measure on it. And here I've got another one, a performance metric, has number of incidents, user experience, and as compliance as part of the metrics. And you see some numbers there, those are the weights attached to that. Metrics are typically, on the one hand, associated to architecture elements. You measure something in the architecture element, and some of the measurements, you can model that with the assessment concept in ArchiMate. So it tells you how to measure things, the assess the outcome. So this is already supported by ArchiMate just by adding this one extension, this one concept, and then you can do things like this. If we then look at different capabilities of ArchiSurance and relate that to different strategic options, and I've listed there 2 options here. There's a longer story behind that, but we will show that in some of the books I'm currently writing. Our 2 main strategic options. One is to really focus on cost savings and operational excellence and efficiency, and is to really focus on customer and on becoming a digital insurance company, and they call that the digital customer intimacy strategy. So those are 2 different options, but you might even want to combine them. You might want to say, well, we have to be both efficient and very customer oriented, and well, focus on social media and well, some other I'll explain later on. This is a way of depicting these capabilities. And on this first strategic option, Archi as a company wants to move into the digital future, and I will show these ideas later on. But this is the way to express that in ArchiMate, using these concepts to really down from the drivers of the organization to the outcomes you want to achieve, the function that you need to follow, really get there to really achieve these outcomes, which capabilities are then employed deliver the outcomes, and analyze the resources required by these capabilities. How are you going to realize them? That's drilling down from where you want to go, and then have to do for that. After that, you will of course go into more detail and develop the more detailed architectures that support these capabilities and resources, but that's no longer the strategic level. So looking at the company, the other insurance companies, they have to deal with very challenging circumstances, and they get hit from 2 different sides. Very low interest rates make it quite difficult to fulfill financial obligations. Especially life insurance companies have often promised all kinds of returns to their customers, but it's very difficult to make these returns. The basic business model of an insurance company is the insurance premiums from customers to gain another rate of return, and then use that again to pay out these. But that's very difficult nowadays. And then there's still disruption from all kinds of fintech companies that really threatens the business models of these large incumbent insurance companies. They are the edges of the company. So Archimedes sees this and wants to react on that. Created his model of their strategic analysis. Of course, this is simplified. This is just an example. Their main driver is, of course, profitability, and then customers increasingly defecting to these digitally savvy competitors, these modern insurance companies that do everything on the web, and they also see that some competitors are a lot cheaper and they take market share because their premium is not really competitive. So they're already in the language, and then we see outcome as a new concept that's added to ArchiMate. That's the result, having competitive premium setting and improved customer satisfaction. And you see that the symbol is really like a goal with the dart stuck in the bullseye. So it's related to the goal concept. The goal is what you want to achieve. The outcome is what you get. So that's the idea of ArchiSurance. It's digital customer intimacy strategy. Sounds really fancy. It's a strong approach. On the one hand, they want to engage with their clients more intimately using social media. Company nowadays is doing that. But the other part is perhaps more interesting. They want to use all kinds of external data to influence the insurance premium of their customers and make a more competitive offer. So more about the behavior of your customers, you can more closely take this insurance premium to that customer. And that can range from, say, fit trackers or black boxes in cars or home automation gateways in the business-to-consumer market. And to business market, you have things like fleet management if you insure cars, or energy networks where you can look at energy consumption and RFID devices in stores, smart building sensors. There's a lot out there. The Internet of Things is really upon us, and the data that's there is very useful for these kinds of companies. This is something that insurance companies actually are doing as we speak. This is not something that I've just invented. I've got lots of examples of insurance companies actually using this kind of data. All there are, of course, many privacy issues involved with this. So not an easy kind of strategy, but let's leave detailed issues for now, and I'll just zoom in on how to model this in ArchiMate. So first of all, we need to address these capabilities that ArchiSurance needs. So it's this new strategy, a course of action in ArchiMate. And if you look at the symbol, it's an arrow towards a goal. So that's the course of action symbol. And capabilities to realize these two outcomes of improved customer satisfaction and premium setting. Those are capabilities it didn't have already. So these are really new. So on the one hand, for customer care, it wants to really move to this digital customer management, and digital channels is part of that. And a part of it is that they want to become this data-driven insurance company that harvests data from all different kinds of sources and analyzes the data to come up with more competitive premiums. On the existing capability map of ArchiSurance, we see that it's going to be extended in this area. The customer care and the claim management capabilities need to be extended with these new capabilities. What I see as important parts of the strategy, and then of course the next step is to identify capabilities might be realized. To pictures like these, we have these three sub-capabilities that we saw on the previous picture, and then there are some resources needed for that. Of course, it's simplified. You will need more and more. You will need other resources as well. But on the left hand, you see, for example, for this digital channel management, you need social competency and media apps. Well, competency might be realized by your customer service team. They will have to have the right skills, the right attitude, etc. And media apps might, for example, be realized by things like the ArchiSurance mobile app. And just as examples of how you model this realization. So you get into let's say, the older ArchiMate concepts. So the concepts at the bottom of this picture, those are the ones that we already have, and you can relate them to the level more strategic concepts of resource and capability, and contribute to realizing your strategy. Obviously, what's needed for the data-driven insurance part of the strategy, you need to have the right data sources, you need to have the data analysis automation in place, and you have the competency to data, and then also see where these data sources come from. And the concept we'll see in more detail in the next few slides. This is called the equipment concept. And here I've modeled the smart connected devices, the Internet of Things stuff, and the other things like warehousing, the business intelligence team, and other tasks related resources. In this picture, it's just a one-to-one relationship. Of course, in practice, that need not be one. You could have many different kinds of social media apps, for example, that to realize this resource. One aspect of these models is that usually relate the assets you have, so all the stuff at the bottom of the previous picture, up to outcomes you want to achieve, and nice analyses from that. And this is really a dashboard from a real situation. You see an analysis of an application portfolio, the relationships across the model to analyze things like the strategic value of applications. So that's useful to get a more, let's say, fact-based assessment of the situation. Nowadays, I often see that business management has to make, let's say, based on gut feeling, having the actual data available that you can provide them via these kinds of dashboards. And from an example model from a pharmaceutical client of ours, sort of scrambled and anonymized, but it's real life data. So that was the map example. Then getting into the Internet of Things, I showed you the smart devices already. This is getting into the physical world. And these physical concepts in ArchiMate are really tightly integrated with the technology layer we already have. You could even say they're just part of the technology layer. So we have a number of concepts, model physical stuff, equipment, well, the term already says it is, all kinds of machinery, but even a shovel can be equipment, or if you're a farm, your horse can be equipment if it's well. Material, the massive part of the physical concepts. It's any kind of material you can model that way. Of course, you might need to have more detailed descriptions. You can use this customization mechanism again that I used to define the metric concept. You could define specific kinds of material that's used in all kinds of production processes. And then behavior part, but we reuse the behavior of the existing technology layer. And this combines these different systems, the physical and IT systems, into one single thing. It can be one node that has both kinds of technology, and we'll have an example of that later on. Here we see the upper layer of what they want to do. So they want to acquire all kinds of data, use that in an analysis process in their application world, and create customer profiles from that, and use that to feed into the insurance premium, and use that as well at an aggregated level to develop new kinds of insurance products. If we then to the physical world where this data acquisition takes place, then find the data acquisition gateway that links to a bunch of smart devices. All these devices are data into that gateway, so they generate the data from these devices, from the equipment, and this is acquired by this acquisition. Here we see some examples of these devices: black boxes in cars, fitness trackers, your alarm system, or your smart thermostat. The last two are in this case part of a larger facility, in this case your smart home. Our thermostat is also connected to another new concept, the distribution network. We could only model distribution of networks that were used for communication, so data, but we can model distribution of physical materials or of energy. So this is an energy network modeled as a distribution network. Deeper into that, we can also look at these Internet of Things devices and how they connect to ArchiSurance's own architecture, and then we get to the microservices architecture that's behind that. So ArchiSurance has the data acquisition gateway, where for each service for each device it connects to, there's a data acquisition function run inside a container. The REST API offering different services where these devices can, for example, register themselves and then feed in data. And this runs on a platform as a service solution. It's not modeled in detail here, but that's the typical kind of architecture you see nowadays. And this is just a high-level picture, just for explanatory purposes. If to model an architecture like this, you will get into more detail probably. But this shows you how this would be connected. So that's the example. Then move something completely different. Manufacturing, the really physical world. And an example that's perhaps the most physical client that we have, steel plant. Well, you can't get much more physical than that. It's really raw materials turning into rolls of steel. And I recently developed this model together with a customer of ours and build it up for you, and you'll see how a steel factory functions. It's certainly the full model. It's simplified, otherwise it wouldn't fit on. But just to give you an impression of what you can do. Here we have a process for create steel, processing raw materials, then steel, it's cast, and then that's rolled into rolls of steel. Of course, so here we see a coke factory that processes raw materials, and we have a blast furnace that makes the steel. That is then cast in the steel plant and that's into the hot strip mill where the rolls of steel come out. Still very simplified. You'll see more on the next slide. We also want to model is of course going across different flows. So, for example, the liquid iron is going from the blast furnace to the steel plant, and the steel slabs are then going from the steel plant to the hot strip mill, and that's finished steel coming out of this whole process. This becomes now it's getting quite realistic. This is the actual model they use. We see that for processing raw materials, we actually 3 factories. Coke, pellets, and sinters come out. You can also model the conveyor belts that are used to transport the materials or the rail transport further on. If we then write, we see details of the steel plant. And at the end, we see that also put material inside a product in ArchiMate. So we're sort of peculiar. ArchiMate was intended initially language for the large information processing organizations like banks and insurance companies and government agencies. And the product consisted of a set of services and a contract. But not just a set of services. So you can also add data or material to your products. So you can put more inside them and then really use it as something that's more similar to what, let's say, normal people call a product and not just ArchiMate people. The product is always associated with some kind of contract. There's some kind of agreement between the buyer and the seller involved. It's not just the finished steel that makes it into a product. It's because you sell it as a product. So observe, if you're a core ArchiMate user, that we've changed the notation for contract. There's a bottom that makes the difference between a contract and a business object. There are two of those changes in the language to help you distinguish between concepts. So this is one of them to make sure that you don't confuse contract with business object. Another example of an improvement. If one of these parts of the process, the hot strip mill, we see that there's much more detail inside them. So there's this, what they call a roll line, where they roll the steel, that's the physical equipment, but then by process control software. And this is, of course, a very high level overview, but here you already see that you can combine the physical and the IT worlds into one single node that combines to and lets you these integrated equipment, well, IT and physical equipment. This is very useful for things like the Industry 4.0 wave, where you see that manufacturing and IT are coming closer and closer together. A customer of ours is doing this very actively. They're in the aircraft manufacturing world, are really replacing their entire paper stream of documents that goes along these aircraft parts by a fully digital system, so that it's much easier to keep track of where the data is and where the physical objects are. So that's helpful to have these concepts now to model this correspondence. So it helps you in modeling your business strategy. We didn't have the concepts before. Now you can really model things like your capabilities, your resources, your courses of action, etc. And this is, I think, very helpful for architects to really work to what the business actually needs. Of course, the codes are probably not the way you want to represent it towards the business. Business might not be interested in the detailed diagrams of how your strategy is decomposed into cells, etc. All the organizations that do these decompositions, they might not be used ArchiMate models. But like I said at the beginning, the visualization of the models is something you tailor to your audience. There is a standard model beneath that, that's where the value is. So you can, of course, depict this in different ways, maybe just in tables or lists or other visualizations. But having a model and having the traceability, that's where the real value is. The examples from the physical world, so you can support things like the Internet of Things, manufacturing, other kinds of use cases. We've seen a bit of improved usability and consistency of the language. In my webinar last week, I gave more details on that, but if you really want to know the nitty-gritty, I invite you to read the standard itself. But in general, this new of ArchiMate really offers you much support in this area of strategy, digital transformation, business change. It's really big help, I think, in modeling these kinds of requirements, these kinds of developments in your organizations. So it really also ArchiMate to move into the future. So finally, I leave you with these links to more information. There's of course the Open Group website where you can download the standard itself. There's a discussion forum on LinkedIn with over 8,000 members nowadays, the ArchiMate group, and that's virtual if you have any questions or you want to discuss features of the language, etc. Outside from Business Design provides you with all kinds of webinars and blogs, etc. I've just started a series of ArchiMate blogs together with some colleagues, so if you follow our website, you will see these appearing. There's a neat little ArchiMate quick reference you can download that provides you with all the concepts of the language in context. So in small books, you see how they're used in context. And beginning, my slides are also available online, and that's the final link you see here. That's my presentation, and then I think it's then time for questions.
Many thanks for that. That's a really good follow-up introduction to ArchiMate 3. Yeah, questions in the QA facility, so if anyone else has any other further questions, please send them into the QA text facility. So start at the top. A question here from Greg. He's asking, were 3.0 revisions made to the motivation layer, make consideration of complementary approaches such as OMG's VDML?
Itself was not really an input, although we can look at it, but VDML is a lot more detailed. The BizBog from the Business Architecture Guild is also partially aligned with VDML. VDML is also quite a new development, and I think we need to see how that pans out and whether it's really going to be taken up in practice. So we found it a bit too early to read the details there. But the phase 3 modeling is one of the things that's certainly our attention, and you can indeed use a new capability concept for that. Intend to write a blog about this, but that will take some time. But it's using capability, also the new grouping concept, and also the possibility to link the value concept that we had since the beginning. You can link that to relationships. Then you can model a flow relation, value to that, and then you can really model value streams. That gets quite close to what VDML is aiming for. But VDML is more detailed than what ArchiMate aims to be. So alignment, but not details.
We have a couple of other follow-up questions. He's asking, can 3.0 be used to illustrate customer experience journey maps or value proposition design?
Well, I would combine several things here, because if you're talking about a customer journey map, that's a combination of typically a process and some metric on how customers evaluate the steps in that process. So that'd be something you need new ArchiMate concepts for. Like I showed you the metric used for capabilities. You do that for your customer journeys as well. You can process and then you can have, say, a survey among your customers and use that data to map a metric to your process. Then you can depict that in different ways. You can do that with, say, a heat map of your process. That could be a representation of your journey map in different ways. So you can do that, but it's not just ArchiMate, it's also the analysis of the customer and the depiction of that using appropriate tools. So that it is certainly doable. So that's what was the other, Simon? Next to customer journeys?
He asked, value proposition design, such as Osterwald's most recent model.
Oh, yeah, the value proposition canvas. You can do that. We have, like I said, a concept value, but it's a bit of what you mean by a value proposition. And also a description of that is fairly high level. For the business model canvas, we have created a mapping from the canvas to ArchiMate. That's business design, because the canvas is a bit, well, at a bit abstraction level. Similar for the value proposition canvas, you can pull the elements of that in more detail in ArchiMate, but animation. So I would use the canvas, both canvases, as a high-level depiction, and then drill down from there into an ArchiMate model. ArchiMate perhaps into an implementation model. I wouldn't replace these canvases by ArchiMate, but I would put that as a more detailed layer underneath them.
Greg, just the question also supplementary for Greg, asking if 3.0 can be used to illustrate Kaplan strategy maps, cascading balanced scorecards, a Hoshin canary policy deployment.
I think that's a different depiction of the kind of information that can be inside your ArchiMate model. Arch itself doesn't provide you with a scorecard concept or view, but the stuff inside the balanced scorecard is, of course, expressible in the concepts that we have in ArchiMate. But it requires a bit of extra work. So it's finding a new kind of viewpoint pluses on top of an ArchiMate model. So it's really supported in the ArchiMate language itself, but the concept ArchiMate provides can certainly be used in that context, yes.
Great stuff. A question from Satish, just a basic question. Can you explain the difference between the TOGAF framework and ArchiMate framework?
Well, the framework ArchiMate is the structure of the language. What TOGAF provides, TOGAF has this, while TOGAF is for framework, of course. Framework is used in many ways. So if you're talking about TOGAF as a framework, it's really a large method with all kinds of parts in it that help you in doing enterprise architecture. So framework in there really means something different from the ArchiMate framework. Really just mean the structure of the language in the picture I showed you before. So yeah, that's a big difference there. The word is quite overloaded.
Okay. How do you document relationships between various architectures in an architecture tool? You said there a numbering or versioning scheme.
It depends on the architecture tool you have. Typically, let's say the more mature tools will have kind of versioning to the objects they store. So that's probably what you want to do. But I'm not sure what you're aiming at. One of the things also do is each relationship a name, and in that name you might want to use a word. ArchiMate doesn't prescribe anything that, but different tools will provide you with different solutions for that.
I ask, what are the specific things added to 3.0 surrounding healthcare? For example, new domains. Are there any specifics like that, Mark? No, there are specific concepts for specific domains like healthcare. What I wanted to emphasize is that
this, for example, this physical world of new concepts can be used in domains like healthcare. I will provide an example of that in the keynote I'm going to give together with Ivor Band at the Open Group Summit in Austin, Texas, because Ivor is from a healthcare provider and he is going to show how this works in practice. So using the concepts I showed you in this context of healthcare, but ArchiMate doesn't provide any domain-specific concepts, neither, let's say, finance or government or manufacturing. It's really a generic language.
Ivor was on the webinar last week, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. From Greg, in your grouping object, so what some EA tools refer to as city planning areas or architecture domains.
For that purpose, you could say, well, architecture domain is also such an overloaded term. But choose the grouping concept for that purpose, but you can use it for other purposes as well. So you can use it to model, for example, well, we just talked about the value stream modeling. You can say, I have these value stages, and what's value stage? I model that with a grouping. So purpose concept, and indeed it can be used in that way. It can be used for architecture building blocks, etc. But are indeed an important action area of grouping. Yes.
Okay. Louise asks, would capability fit with a capability model?
I'm on the question.
Okay, so if you're still on, can you give us a little bit more detail there? We'll move on. Question from AV. Can ArchiMate actually create capability increment diagrams? So how is this done? Establishing capability increment points on spokes, etc. Spiderweb diagram concept.
Yeah, the spiderweb showed, of course not ArchiMate itself, it's from our tool that does the analyses, but you can do that also for capability increments, and I think the example I showed you was about increments. What you typically do if you model it in ArchiMate is use architecture plateaus as the concept for describing the evolution of the architecture, and the increments are then tied to these plateaus. So you would say this plateau that provides the next increment of this capability. And if you want a specific concept for expressing capability increment, that would, using this language customization mechanism again, that would be a specialization of the capability concept itself. You could do that, say, well, I've got a specific concept for that. So you can do these analyses, certainly. Okay.
Last, can you establish layer relationships of capabilities? For example, capability and sub-capabilities.
In the example I had in my slides, that's also that is already a two-level capability map. So it has main and sub-capabilities. Certainly, you can go as deep as you want to in ArchiMate because it doesn't pose any on the levels of nesting you can create.
Okay, with questions about capability, I'll read two together. Gail was asking, where can we find the capability assessment methodology? And the second one is, how do you feed information to produce that capability assessment?
Well, the methodology itself is not part of ArchiMate, of course, and there are different methodologies for that. You might want to look at the recent Open Group on business capability modeling. They provide some information on that. The BizBoc from the Business Architecture Guild has some information on that. But outside the scope of ArchiMate itself, the data, again, well, it depends on your methodology, of course, where the data is coming from. But it depends on the software you use. In our case, it's very easy to read in Excel sheets and link that to these metrics and then show the spiderweb, for example. And the other software, I don't know how they do that, but it's probably something similar. If you're using, say, Visio, no, then you can't do it. Then you have, well, you're just using a drawing tool. Use some more than that, of course.
Okay. Dimitri asks, can I link one business function or process to multiple capabilities? He says, do I assign a percentage to how much each capability is fulfilled with business functional process?
You can indeed, in that way. These percentages, you could indeed add those as attributes if you want to. It doesn't prescribe anything. In our tool, we can indeed do that and do these analyses, and I've got a demo model that shows what happens if you tweak these strategies. That's interesting to also, for example, give a weight to the strategic options, and then see how important a certain capability is for these different strategies. And if you then change the weight of the strategy, you will see that the importance of capability shifts around. So yeah, you can create that, but it's not a standard part of ArchiMate.
Marianne asks a very practical question here. She says, I'm introducing ArchiMate into our company. However, fellow architects are complaining about the fact that they now have to do double work, ArchiMate models and Visio or PowerPoint infographics for management. Do you have suggestions, Mark?
On the tools you use, I would say the ArchiMate models, those usually they have more details, but if you create, say, dashboards on top of that in your tool, I just showed you one of those dashboards. I think that's the kind of information management wants to have, and my guess is that many of them are not really interested in the architecture diagrams, but in the information that comes out of that. So the analyses you can build on top of these models, that's what it is. If your tool supports these analyses, you don't have to do any double work. It just comes from the same software. And redraw the pictures to make them look a little prettier. It might also be that they're not really interested in the pictures at all, and that they find these architecture diagrams just too complicated. I would with simplifying things too much, because if you leave out important details and man is making based on the simplified diagrams you feed them, they might make costly mistakes because they perceive that the world is simple, even though the world might be more complex. So if the complexity of the world, I think this won't help. If they just don't like the depiction of the models, well, then I'd want to put it in PowerPoint or something. In my experience, I think stuff like that, analysis results, is all convincing to management than having the complicated diagrams.
Okay, that's great, Mark. We've now got our allocated time, so I think this would be a good moment to end today's presentation. Mark, you got any final comments you'd like to make before we finish today?
Well, specifically, if you still have questions left, just drop me an email and I'll see if I can answer them. You could also drop the question into the ArchiMate discussion forum on LinkedIn. That's another option. But hopefully we managed to answer most of the questions. And if anything comes up, feel free to contact me.
Well, thank you, Mark, for your time today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Please do keep an eye on the Open Group website for future events and the activities that are going on in the conference in Austin, referred to by Mark. So once again, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you all again soon. Bye.
Thank you.